Hello and welcome to DTC Podcast. I'm Eric Dyck. Today I got to chat with ad tech OG Ned Samuelson, Managing Director of Growth of the Americas at Criteo, the customer acquisition engine that masters the open web to drive top of funnel and retargeting conversions across display ads and meta retargeting. I go way back in ad tech and display advertising specifically, so it was fun to compare notes with Ned and catch up, who came to the podcast with a bunch of concrete things brands can do to improve their Q4 results, along with some very unique personal facts we get into at the end. If you want to grow your business with Criteo, make sure you go to criteo.com/DTC. Hope you enjoy it. On the show.
Q4, and especially Black Friday, Cyber Monday, people are so price conscious. In display ads, you can do what's called strike-through pricing, where you show a price and then actually an X goes through it, usually in red, and then a green price is shown, the sale price essentially. That is incredibly effective from both the conversion rate perspective, and even if you are actually discounting, you see an increase in average order value because it gives people the option to buy multiple products. They say, well, this thing was $100, now it's $70. Maybe I buy the $70 thing now, just save $30, and then you go buy from that same site a $50 item.
Ned, welcome to the D2C podcast. I was just Googling it because I've been around in this industry since about like 2009 or so. Criteo was one of the first companies that I was like aware of in the space. And you've been there. I was just looking for just coming up on 10 years. You've almost been a decade there. I'm curious, what's the biggest change you've seen in the digital marketing space in the last decade?
Gosh, you're making me feel old. I have been at Criteo. It'll be 10 years in September. So yeah, that's all that gray in my beard. Look, I think probably the biggest sort of change I've seen, especially over the last probably 2 or 3 years, is sort of the lowering of barrier to entry in e-commerce and in D2C in general. When I first started at Criteo as a salesperson, and I talked to prospects and clients, the consistent feedback I got from in terms of just like their web presence and their website was that it essentially cost about $100,000 to build an effective D2C website, and it had a sort of an ongoing cost of between 50 and 60 grand a month. You fast forward to now, where you have these e-commerce platforms, most notably Shopify, who Criteo partners with and absolutely loves working with. It's literally free to build a Shopify website, and the ongoing monthly cost is a percentage of on-site revenue. And so that's really created this pretty cool new sort of area of the market that frankly didn't exist prior. And it's not just the sort of SMB. So it's not just small and medium-sized websites. It's the fact that you can be a small or medium-sized, D2C or e-commerce website, and you can grow very, very quickly. There's tons of examples of clients we work with that started out as, literally in their garage, and now are doing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue. So that's probably the biggest change that I've seen over the last 10 years.
Arm the rebels, as Shopify always said.
Exactly.
And I think it's interesting just because Criteo, describe to me exactly what Criteo is.
Sure. Yeah. So, Criteo is essentially I would say we are the commerce media leader. But what that really means is that we help our clients grow and scale through display and video advertising, and specifically through performance display and advertising. We say at Criteo, performance is everything, and that's really true because we have no upfront costs, we have no minimums, we have no binding contracts of any kind. Literally, what every single D2C e-commerce client has in common, whether you're J. Crew or Ned's T-shirt Shack, is that you've given us a return on ad spend goal, and it's our job to hit that return on ad spend goal within the first 30 days. And we are very effective at doing that and really helping our clients grow their audience and then in turn that audience into customers. And that's really what we've cut our teeth on, and what we continue to do.
I have a special place in my heart for display advertising. It was probably what was my first big win in the industry, but way back in 2008 or 9. I had a client. I was working at an affiliate marketing company, and we had a client that was a jewelry auction website called bids.com.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I was driving I ended up working out interesting like CPA deals with a bunch of different display networks directly, including Yahoo. And where I had a CPA deal on these jewelry leads that would then come through and turn into like clients. It was one of the first. It would turn into like customers of jewelry, and they gave me like weekly reports on the ROI essentially of my campaigns. This is way back in like 2009 or 10, and it was like a really, I think, good example of performance marketing that works all the way through. I'm curious, what do you see as the role in terms of the customer journey right now when it comes to display marketing specifically?
Yeah, so it's funny. Is like I think display has historically, and certainly true of Criteo, been seen as a really strong way of retargeting users. So really, I think if I went back even 5 years, most of our clients sort of looked at it as saying, okay, we spend a lot of money in search to get users to our site, but when they don't convert and they leave and they go to CNN or the Washington Post or Facebook or now Meta, then getting a display ad in front of them is sort of necessary to get them to engage with the ad, click on it, come back to the site, and convert. And I think what's really sort of changed is that now display advertising, and especially Criteo display advertising, has shown the ability to actually represent the entire funnel. And so that's through our essentially lookalike audiences and our behavioral audiences. That has given us the ability to actually target users who've never been or never engaged with a D2C website, get them to actually come to the site, and then move them down the funnel to ultimately be a converter. The last thing I'll say on that, Eric, is another sort of, I think, significant change to that sort of that paradigm of conversion is the sophistication that Criteo has helped support in the industry of once you get someone to convert, that isn't the end of the journey, because LTV, lifetime value, is truly the name of the game. And so it's not just getting them to convert the first time, it's really figuring out with display ads and video ads to some extent, how do we get them to keep coming back? How do we make them a true sort of loyal customer? And that's been something that's really been exciting to me about sort of watching the evolution of Criteo, is seeing, and it's not just again with your sort of enterprise size businesses, it's also with your mid market and even SMB businesses, where if you have a quality product that people like, re-engagement it tends to be what drives the majority of your revenue, and that's pretty exciting.
Totally. Can we get a little nitty gritty on display right now? I remember like when I was running these campaigns, there was basically this one unit. It was called the Yahoo Mail Monster. It was buying a display ad right after someone had sent an email. And I feel like that was like one of the ultimate spots for a display ad, because it's like you've just sent an email, what's next? And there's this big oversized ad there. I'm just curious, like what in terms of like ad units or even just sort of creative is really working, like overcome banner blindness at this point with display?
Yeah, so I think there's actually I would say there's sort of actually two steps in that process of people talk a lot about banner blindness, but in order to get banner blindness, you have to actually see the banner. And so I've always sort of chuckled at on CNN, or on, in my case, I say CNN, but ESPN. Let's be honest here. And you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page where no one ever goes. It's way past. We're not talking about the byline. It's past anything, and you see 7 display ads under there, and you say like, no one has ever scrolled down this far except for me, because I work in the industry, right? And so I think the first thing that Criteo developed and this is 8, 9 years ago, was as we think about inventory, both on our own private exchange, but also in buying through, to your point, Yahoo or GDN, Google Display Network, is only buying what we would define as premium inventory. And that to us is above the fold, and it has to be one of the two largest ad sizes. And so that's I think the first step. Then you move on to actual banner blindness, right? And I think everyone has certainly experienced that. And I think what Criteo has done, which is sort of seems simple, but is quite eloquent, is our recommendation engine. So the way we operate is instead of just showing a user, in the case of a retargeted user, the exact product they looked at on the site. So they went to Ned's T-shirt Shack and they looked at a white polo. Instead of just showing them the white polo, what we actually do is take all of the data that we have from that website about similar users who have, in this case, purchased that polo, and what else did they engage with. So, again, in the case of the fictitious Ned's T-shirt Shack, maybe the matching pair of navy shorts, or the baseball hat, or the shoes, and so what it's done, first and foremost, is it dramatically increases click-through rate and in turn conversion rate, and so that's a pretty good indicator that you're kind of stepping away from banner blindness. But the other thing it has done is actually increased average order value. So what we see in our campaigns is if a client's traditional average order value on their website is $100 on that campaign they're running with Criteo, maybe it's 110, 112, even $115. And so I think that's it really is sort of part and parcel with the idea of not only increasing lifetime value, like we just talked about, but also increasing the actual value of each conversion. And that tends to be sort of two of the very important metrics that our clients are looking at to sort of decide where they put their budget and how they utilize it effectively.
Help me understand where Criteo fits exactly in a marketer's stack, because it doesn't seem like it's not going to replace your meta necessarily. You're not going to run all of your top of funnel meta campaigns through Criteo, mainly using it for retargeting. Is that correct?
So I would be remiss if I didn't say that you can in fact run meta display ads through Criteo.
Yep.
But no, I think it's totally a fair assessment, Eric, which is like as you think about or certainly as our clients sort of think about where they spend their dollars. I think there's two things that we've sort of learned. One is if you were to say, like, look, we're going to run on Meta. Great, run on Meta. If you were to say, look, we're going to run, on other social channels, that's fantastic. Do that. Oh, we also want to make sure we're on Google, GDN. So great, you do that. And then you just mentioned Yahoo, got to be on that. You would have to be able to run what Criteo can run in real time for you across all of the places that we have access to. You would need, I'm not even talking about mobile or cross-device or app. You would probably need to be running with 15 vendors. And that creates such a level of, frankly, inefficiency. And again, even if you did that and you did that effectively, none of those vendors would be able to effectively speak to each other, right? So you'd end up with a situation, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this has seen it. If you've ever, you've gone to a website and all of a sudden you see 3 different banner ads, but all for the same company, and that are all slightly different. And you're like, why would they do that? Well, it's because they're running through, usually through 3 or even 4 different vendors. So, I think the interesting sort of thing about Criteo is what we do is by no means easy, but there is a simplicity to it of being able to have kind of a one-stop shop for your performance display and video needs.
And it's not true to say that you're a retargeting network either. Like display is like how do you conceive of like the inventory or sort of like the attention share? Because I feel like for a lot of I come from this a meta agency with Google services as well, and I feel like top of mind are often these social channels, but I feel like display it can be a real unsung hero. And I feel like I am interested at how brands are using it top of funnel as well. So I feel like that is a growth opportunity.
Totally. So look, I think Well, look, I think there's two things there, and don't quote me on the exact data point, but there is a level of inefficiency when you look at where D2C clients spend their dollars between walled gardens, which would be social like Meta or Google, and what we would call at Criteo the open internet, which is everything else. And so I think, look, again, don't quote me on the exact data, but it's something like 70% of their spend is on the walled gardens, but actually 65% of the conversions driven happen on the open internet. And so I think, look, it's what I would ultimately say is that while to your point, Criteo has historically been seen as a retargeter, the reason that has changed so dramatically for Criteo over the last 3 years isn't because our access to data changed. It isn't because of for some other reason. It's actually because there's been the realization that display advertising can truly take a user down the entire funnel from truly first touch, meaning, wow, I didn't even know this brand existed, or I was aware of this brand, but I had never even thought about them, all the way down to I am now a customer. And then, of course, like I said before, the next step being like, I am a loyal customer. I want to keep engaging with this brand. What I will tell you, Eric, which is sort of, I think, is interesting, is that from a social perspective, a lot of money gets spent on social. Obviously Meta being the primary example there, and I think it's largely looked at from a brand perspective, is how do we build our brand? And I don't think there's enough focus on holding all of your marketing vendors to a true performance outcome. We need to see conversions. This dollar needs to turn into X dollars in return. And I think part of that comes from just the historical context of a lot of marketers have spent time in whether it's TV or billboards or, sponsorship deals. And again, I think there's a place for all of those things. But when you're used to that level of sort of or lack of connection of being able to say, well, this person saw this billboard and then converted, which you obviously really can't do, all the way down to display ad, where it's like this user clicked on the ad, clicked on a specific image in the ad, came to the site and specifically purchased that product. There's a big divide between those two things.
100%. Yeah, we're definitely performance preaching all the time on this podcast. I was curious also about like you probably sit across a ton of brands at this point, and you see trends in the industry. We're sort of like, I think everyone's now. I was talking to a really organized person, and he was like, "I'm actually 16 months in the future with how I think about business and promotions," which I was really impressed by. But I think a lot of brands, especially in that pre-SMB and that small part of the SMB, are probably like now starting to think about their Black Friday, their Q4 plans. So I'm curious from like what you're seeing brands doing now and what you've seen over the past few like big Q4s. What do you think are some tips for success heading into Q4 this year?
Yeah, so it's funny. Some of the things that we focus on in Q4 are actually sort of like directly the inverse of what you would tell a client to do the other basically 10 months of the year. And I'll give you an example is Q4, and especially sort of the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then what we call retargeting Tuesday. People are so price conscious, right? And it's so much more about getting in front of that user to try and get them to, frankly, to some extent, purchase things they wouldn't have normally considered the other, 10 months of the year. And so, one of the examples that I always use is in display ads. You can do what's called strike through pricing, where you show a price and then actually an X goes through it, usually in red, and then a green price is shown, and that the green price is the sale price essentially. That is honestly incredibly effective from both the conversion rate perspective, and even honestly, it's funny, even if you are actually discounting, you see an increase in average order value because it gives people the option to buy multiple products. They say, well, this thing was $100, now it's 70. Okay, maybe I buy the $70 thing now, just save $30, and then you go buy from that same site a $50 item. And so all of a sudden, the average order value there is $120 instead of what you might have gotten out of the original 100. The other thing I would say, and it's again, neither of these things are particularly sexy, but they are very effective, is inventory, right? As much as Q4 is about bringing new products to market and sort of showing the market what new thing your website is doing, it's also an incredible opportunity to look at what inventory you are still holding on to that you've had over the last year, or in the case of someone you had in the podcast, 16 months, and saying, how can I most effectively unload this inventory, especially if it's making room for new products. So I think I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but one of our clients who sells electric bikes had I think it was something like 1,000 bikes of old inventory, and they set the goal of trying to sell that inventory in from November 15th to December 15th. And actually through a pretty aggressive marketing campaign with Criteo, they actually sold that 1,000-unit inventory in 48 hours. And it was, obviously it then created some supply chain issues, but that's not, I don't have to worry about that. We just sell the
Yeah.
stuff. So
Oh, of
it was
course.
pretty cool.
But a note that Q4 for a lot of brands can be as many sales as they make in the year or close. You can, and so I feel like it's you don't want to underestimate inventory heading into that year.
Very true. Yes, that is a good point. You do not want to be short on inventory. I think numerically speaking, especially if we talk specifically about very traditional D2C, regardless of size, I think we see between 65 and 70% of sales for the year happen in Q4. So it truly is make or break. And to your point about sort of preparation, I know it's sort of the dog days of August and everyone, people are going on vacation. But this is a really good opportunity to sort of both prep for that season, but also do the appropriate testing. Is how do you test different messaging? How do you test different ad units? How do you test different, portions of the funnel, from lower funnel to mid funnel to upper funnel, in order to make sure you put your best foot forward for Q4.
I don't know how technical you want to get, but when I was in the display space, I remember tracking was always a challenge, and there was always different platforms coming out talking about different ways to challenge. There was server to server tracking. There's cookies, of course, with and there's potential issue. Obviously that we're going to a bit of a cookieless future. What can you say about attribution and Criteo's technology when it comes to actually tracking people cross-platform, cross-device? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I'm not as technical as maybe I should be, but maybe I can fake it with the best of them. I could play someone
That
technical
sounds like
on
me.
TV. Yeah,
That sounds great. Yeah.
No, look, I think that there's two sort of important aspects of tracking. The first is actually attribution, and so look at Criteo, we are what we'd say is attribution agnostic, which is sort of a BYO, bring your own attribution model to Criteo, whether that's last click, whether that's post click, whether that's post click and post view. I mean, there's a lot of variations on it, and I certainly I won't bore you with a 2-hour conversation about what I believe the ideal attribution setup is. But I do think it is important. First and foremost is to if I think of Criteo as a heat-seeking missile to drive conversions, the most important part of that is to drive conversions that the client that are valuable to the client. And that's why I really love that we are attribution agnostic. So that's the first thing. I think, look, the second piece of that is traditionally tracking isn't, in my opinion, the difficulty here, right? Like, whether it's cookies or the amount of first party data that Criteo has, we can track anything, right? When it comes to tracking, it's like we can say when the user, exactly when they clicked, when they converted, what they converted on, what the value of that conversion was, what the LTV of that is. I mean, we could get crazy basically. But where I think the true sort of strategic element of it is making sure that you can effectively attribute those conversions to the appropriate vendor. And so what we see is, where you see sort of, I think, waste and inefficiency is, and I'll give you an example for clients that use exclusively last click attribution, right? In a world where you exclusively use last click attribution, that means you're essentially going to give no credit to search. You're going to give almost no credit to email, and you're going to give almost all of your credit probably to affiliate, like you described before. And so I think having a good grasp on your customer's journey and how many touch points it takes from a marketing perspective, but not just marketing, how many organic touch points does it take for someone to convert, and then applying the appropriate attribution is what allows you to not only credit appropriately, but I think even more importantly, and I think we've all, anyone who's been in the industry long enough has seen this, where, the example of the client who is using 5 vendors to run 5 different marketing channels, and each vendor is hitting a 5-to-1 return on ad spend, but the overall return on ad spend is a 1-to-1 because all the vendors are taking credit for all the same conversions. And so I think that's, look, traditionally that's why people have moved to last click. But I think, again, now the amount of data available through a platform like Criteo, through a partnership with other platforms like a Measured or a Rockerbox, has really empowered our clients to be more sort of prescriptive about their attribution. And the last thing I'll say on it, Eric, is like we're finally, over the last, I'd say 2.5, almost 3 years, at a place where we can also do effective attribution, not just online, but the connection between online and in store. Because, look, if you think about even just COVID, this sort of buy online, pick up in stores has been a huge element, but also people going into store. I mean, I used to laugh. One of the things that I was always, was a good selling point at Criteo is because we have the store connection, we can guarantee that if a user goes in store and buys a pair of shoes, at the very least, we're not going to show that user online that pair of shoes. I think we've all had that experience where we buy a pair of shoes or buy a shirt, and then we go get on our computer and we see an ad for that exact pair of shoes we just purchased. You're kind of like, well, that's a waste of a display ad. That's a waste of, X number of cents. And so being able to connect store, not just your own store, but also retail media, so third-party vendors, and then also your own website, has been hugely impactful in eliminating, sort of waste and inefficiency.
So who in our audience should be going, is Criteo.com, who in our audience should be going to, like, which, we like to manifest on the platform. So which of our advertisers, or like what kind of people should be going to Criteo.com right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a relatively simple question, which is if you have a website of almost any size where you are trying to monetize an action on your site, then Criteo can help you. And that can be anything, as I said, from Ned's T-shirt Shack, which is very e-commerce D2C, but all the way through. I mean, look, we work with insurance companies who are trying to drive leads on their site, people to fill out forms. Honestly, it's new in the last probably 1.5 to 2 years, but even CPG, where they're not actually trying to drive users to engage with their own website, but trying to drive users specifically to other websites to purchase. It's something we do very well. But look, I have to say our bread and butter, and I kind of stick with this, is like if you own a Shopify website of any size or BigCommerce or WooCommerce, we will be by far your most effective performance digital marketing channel. And I would take that against search, against email, against text message, against anything else in terms of driving the most conversions at the lowest cost or the highest efficiency.
It's quite the statement. I think it's awesome. I think you should also consider adding Ned on perhaps LinkedIn. I don't know if you tweet as well, because you also filled out some of the most interesting information I've ever had in a podcast guest. So when it comes to things outside of your life, I want to run them down quickly.
Okay.
We can dive in. So one of them is your obsession with root beers, which I love. Yep. You've reviewed over 100 root beers on a 10-point scale. You have you've been to over 100 Counting Crows concerts. That one is a little concerning. I'm I'm not going to lie. We won't dive into that one. But the one I brought it up, I was telling my co-founder that your third one, which is that you've built like a complex system for understanding the economy of points.
Yes. Yes.
I just feel like for our audience, that might be. Could you drill in on that one a little bit in the last little bit here?
Look, let me say this first: is I'm the original points guy. Like the points guy website, he took my idea. No, I mean, look, the funny sort of like the say the paradox behind my point system is number one is I built this algo and yet I actually don't like to travel. So despite the fact that I keep very careful track of all my frequent flyer miles and hotel points, I actually don't like to fly and I don't really like to travel, much to my wife's chagrin. But no, like it comes from my father has a PhD in applied math, and so and like him, I'm also extraordinarily cheap. And so this sort of idea of frequent flyer miles always certainly appealed to me. And it started with sort of one Excel spreadsheet and a macro, and now sort of in real time I can keep track of, because point values actually really do change in real time, again depending on a number of different scenarios. And so the original idea was that essentially a frequent flyer mile was often worth 1 mile is worth about a penny, but that actually can change to up to 5 cents down to half a penny. And so I have I have actually like sort of what I call my Mendoza line of how much I should pay for a flight in actual cash versus when is it worth using frequent flyer miles. And so that's like the relationship I try and use for something that I try to avoid doing at all costs. So yeah,
It's a paradox.
I'm definitely, yeah, I mean, look, and I've gotten crazy. The last thing I'll say on it is must be before I was married and had kids, when I had a little more free time on my hands. I once figured out that if I had 2 days, and it was March, and I had 2 days, and if I flew to LA and back in 2 days, that it would essentially be worth, in frequent flyer miles, it'd be worth about 20 grand. And so I actually flew, I do 2 seats. So my father and I flew to Los Angeles. We had lunch in the airport and then flew home. So 12 hours, in one go, in order to get about 20 grand worth of freaking flyer miles. So if that's not wasted time, I don't know what is.
If you can find ROAS in frequent flyer miles, then I'm sure you can help brands find ROAS on the open web.
Yeah, something like that. The last thing I'll say on it is, we have a lot of clients at Criteo who are travel aggregators, and I was actually down in Connecticut with Priceline a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying how well their rental car business was doing, and I sort of casually just said, "Well, of course it's doing well. You guys have the best deals on rental cars." And they like looked at me, and I was like, "Well, my algorithm says that," and they were like, "Wait, we're gonna need to talk through." They're like, "The Criteo algorithm?" I was like, no, my personal Excel algorithm for aggregating points. So
that's hilarious.
I guess I've got too much free time on my hands.
Well, you gotta side project that algorithm, because I feel like there's lots in our audience. Our audience loves algorithms of all kinds. So that was awesome. Ned, yeah. Thanks for coming on the D2C podcast today. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, look forward to chatting with you again. And next time we can talk about the Bruins, because I know how much you love the Bruins.
Oh my goodness! Don't start me on the Bruins. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer, all one word, .co. I'm Eric Dyck, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.